Greetings from Baltimore, Maryland, the home of the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. My name is Abra Bush, and I serve as the Senior Associate Dean of Institute Studies here at Peabody. I'm absolutely delighted you could join us today for our session entitled Current Trends in Admissions, Recruitment, and Enrollment Management. We have a wonderful panel lined up for you today, and I'm sure it'll be a fantastic conversation. So thanks for spending an hour with us. Before we get started, I'd like to thank a number of Peabody staff members who, as always, are behind the scenes helping us out and supporting these calls. Without this group of people, we absolutely could not make this happen. Adam Scalici from Peabody's production team will be in the background monitoring the webinar and working through any technical channels we may have. Patrick Wallen from my office will provide additional support. And Christina Mansior from Peabody's Launchpad is here to help me curate any questions that you have and make sure we end on time. A very special thank you to all of them. A few quick notes before we begin. It would be super great if you could hop into the chat and introduce yourselves. Please make sure that the "to" is highlighted as all panelists and attendees. We'd love to hear from you, hear where you're from, and hope you'll continue the conversation in the chat throughout this interactive session. This will be a panel style conversation, so we'll get this started with the presenters. I'll start by asking them a number of questions, but as you have questions, please place those into the Q&A area of the webinar so we can easily find them and queue them up to ask of the group. Finally, I will let you know that, as always, we're very grateful that the presenters have agreed to allow us to record this webinar. And the session will, as always, be posted to the Peabody Keep Teaching website within a few days. And because you registered for the session, you will receive a link to that video as well. So please feel free to pass it along as you wish. We really appreciate you continuing to support this community. So now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome our guest presenters for today. Their bios are all available on our website. Robert Borden is currently Vice President and Senior Consultant at Best Fit Education, and until recently, Vice President of Enrollment at CalArts. Laura Hoffman is Assistant Dean for Admissions and Enrollment Management at the University of Michigan. John Huling serves as Director of Admissions at our very own Peabody Institute. Fred Peterbark is the Assistant Dean of Enrollment Management and Student Services for the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University. And Townsend Plant serves as Associate Dean for Enrollment and Student Life, also at our very own Peabody Institute. A very special thank you to all of them for agreeing to be with us today and for spending an hour with all of you. So here we go. The very first question I have is for Laura and John. In this crazy COVID time, how are schools approaching admissions and recruitment during these unprecedented days?
Thanks, Abra, and thanks everybody for being here. John Huling here, Director of Admissions at Peabody. And I think I speak for most of us when I say that in any other year, right now, myself and my team would be on the road. We'd be traveling around the country to college fairs and conferences, maybe doing international recruitment, which we do every few years. But of course, this is a year like no other year. So all of us had to be very creative. And like most of the world, we've gone virtual. So, you know, one of the things that's so important during the recruitment part of the year in the fall is that we have access to the students so they can get the information they need and our faculty can meet them. So I'll give you a few examples of what Peabody has done that we're enjoying doing and in the virtual world. We've created a series called Peabody Presents, which we're doing 3 of these throughout the fall, and these are evening presentations for our prospects. The theme of it is applying to music schools, so it's generic enough and basic enough that we're hoping to help students no matter where they're looking, you know, to go to college, about how to apply, what to look for in a program, whether it's liberal arts with a conservatory university, how to prepare for auditions, what faculty are looking for. But of course, you know, we're taking the opportunity to promote Peabody a little bit when we can, talk about what we think, you know, differentiates us from our peer schools. We think that's important for the students to know. And then during the day, my team and I, several hours a week, have a series called Casual Chats. You know, this is when, you know, the summer and fall is when families come in and they stand in our office and we come out and we greet them, we answer all their frequently asked questions. Well, this is an opportunity to do that virtually. So several hours a week, we just reach out our prospect base and say, hey, we're sitting here. It's very informal, just a nice opportunity to zoom in and see these students and have them see us and, you know, be as friendly, hopefully, as we would be if they were in our office. And one new thing we're going to do this year, we haven't done it yet, but we have a couple scheduled that I am excited about. Kind of going with the casual chats idea, something called casual conversations. And these are going to be evening group presentations where we're going to invite what we call our influencers and recommenders to join us. You know, this isn't something we would normally do, but, you know, it's so important for us that the private teachers and the university teachers and guidance counselors and the band directors and choral directors know what's going on at Peabody. And so we figured we're going to take advantage of this virtual world and give them an opportunity to meet with us. So we can, you know, they'll have different questions than students will have. And we, you know, we're excited about what's going on at Peabody, and we want to make sure everybody knows, you know, what's going on. And so we're going to do a few of those this fall, and that might be something that, you know, we'll do going forward too. And we wouldn't have had to do it if, you know, the situation was what it is. And then industry-wide, I just want to, you know, give a shout out to, you know, most of the music schools around this country are collaborating. We call it the Music Admissions Roundtable. It's a group of us that usually just once a year we meet at conferences. But what we're doing now is we have created a series of virtual college fairs, and we're all on board with this. We have over 100 schools participating in this, and we all go out to our contact and our prospect bases, and we have these set up. They're actually scheduled at all different times of the day, these 5 different ones. We had the first one we had a week ago was at 9 a.m. in the morning on the East Coast. And that was to serve as our international students. And I know that the West Coast folks, you know, had to get up bright and early around 5 a.m. to participate in that. But again, we have another one of those this week, and we expect great success with that. We just think that this is an opportunity for students to come. They can talk to all 100 schools if they talk quickly, or they can tune into the schools that they want to learn most about. So I'm really proud of, you know, industry-wide that everybody has collaborated to kind of get us through this. So that's my first round there, and I'm sure Laura has a lot to offer here.
Hi, everybody. I'll jump in and tag on to what John's already given us. A great start to this particularly intriguing conversation. And before I do that, thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today. This is a great honor. As John said, all of the recruitment activity now has converted to online settings. And in addition to the various outreach activities that John's described, I think a lot of us are also thinking about how can we best present our faculty where you can't invite prospective students to a recital, or other ways of seeing who they are and what they do. So we've placed a special emphasis on curating YouTube performances, putting together playlists for faculty to help them really be the first thing that comes up when a student Googles, you know, trombone at Michigan, or whatever it is that they're searching for, to help the students find our faculty and really hear not only faculty performances, but student performances, chamber music performances, all of the different things, including those that have been done since the pandemic. So how are students maneuvering in this online world? And to be able to see a chamber ensemble, masks enabled, social distancing enabled, and know, yeah, it actually can work, and students are happy with the quality of the music making that they're engaged in. So we're putting a special emphasis on that. We all know that students like us are regular people adapting to this new world, and Zoom fatigue is real, we all know. So trying to find other ways that students can engage quietly or through the Zoom format to learn more about our schools. In terms of admissions, we are all facing down the reality that in-person auditions, perhaps some of our favorite times of the year, are not going to happen this year. And I think all are trying to plan for that as the reality. I think the most important thing is to create a fair and equitable process across all the departments while respecting and responding to the unique needs of various disciplines. Specific attention, I think, has to be paid as we design these processes to ensure that faculty can assess the qualities and the characteristics that they have long determined are most important to their recommendations for applicants who are a good fit for the institution, and their ability to, as they would in an in-person audition that maybe turns into a miniature masterclass where they're checking potential and responsiveness and all of those things. How can we do that best in the online audition format? And a flexibility to ensure that students who are, like some of us on various days, without reliable internet, that they have an equal opportunity to participate. Specific attention, I think, has to be paid to our percussion friends, our organist friends, where access to instruments could be possible if they're in a district where the schools are not open, or the churches are not allowing, synagogues are not allowing in. Voice performance without a collaborative pianist, how in the world do you do that? But there are some students who are not going to have access to someone in a setting where they can do any sort of a live performance. Conducting auditions without an ensemble, how do you do that? So I think a lot of us are spending a great deal of time within our own local environment, because for me, all recruiting admissions work like this is local. You have to respond to the environment in which you live. So working with our own faculty, our own students, to find those fair and equitable processes for all of our different cohorts. We'll stop there for the moment. There's plenty more one could do.
Thank you, Laura and John. It's certainly true that it is challenging right now to rethink all that you have done for so many years and all the traditions that we have. And I really appreciate it, and it resonated with me, John, that we do everything we do more, we do better and more strongly when we do it with our partners. So thank you for that. You know, it is important to me to note that as enrollment management professionals, one of the things that all of you do is effectively thread the needle on planning for enrollments, and you do it on such a granular level in the performing arts. Bob, I wonder if you might speak to how you're planning or how you might go about planning during this time of COVID, and what are the implications for studios, ensembles, and financial aid? Have we lost Bob?
We might have lost Bob.
We might have lost Bob. All right, so I'll wait on Bob for that question. I apologize. I didn't see that he's having internet problems today. So if it's okay, I'll turn to the next question, which is actually for my colleague Townsend. Townsend, there has been no stop to the challenges around immigration over the last couple of months, and those question marks and challenges just keep coming. Can you maybe explain the impact of COVID on international students and how schools have navigated the complexities of immigration regulations this year? And, you know, if you had your crystal ball, is there anything you could do to predict what's next?
Yeah, so happy to talk through that a little bit. And good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have all of you. Thank you for being with us, and thanks for including me in the discussion. It's great to be here. So yeah, this has been an incredibly challenging time for international students. It's probably an understatement. You know, from travel restrictions that were put in place way back, you know, when many of us were doing auditions last year, not to mention over the summer as students were, you know, planning their enrollments, delayed visa processing because of suspended consulate activity around the world, to changing immigration rules. You know, and for students, I mean, it's created a tremendous amount of uncertainty, right? And I think, you know, in many ways, frankly, is causing a lot of international students to question studying in the United States, which is a big concern long-term for schools around the country, not just music schools. And of course, you know, for schools that have moved to completely remote formats, it's made, you know, studying challenging for students given the differences in time zones and all the challenges that it creates, not only, you know, in terms of synchronous learning, but in terms of, you know, heightening the feeling that many international students may be feeling around being disconnected from their peers. So it's taken an emotional toll for sure. For institutions, it's made enrollment and other planning difficult to say the least. Not to mention creating constant questions around how best to advise international students of their options. And so I would say right now, one of the biggest concerns that we're facing, and I'm sure everyone on the panel and everyone probably here attending the session would agree, has to do with the regulatory relief that was put in place in March for international students and what the implications of that is going to be moving forward. So just to recap, as everybody is aware, I'm sure, the immigration rules, the original immigration rules specify that students who are studying in the United States on an F1 visa cannot have more than one online course as part of their program. And of course, that rule was relaxed and a lot of flexibility was injected into the system in March, given that we all had to pivot very quickly to remote format. And then over the summer, that was extended through the fall. But it is slated to expire at the end of the fall semester. And so there's big questions for what the implications are for spring, especially for students who may have traveled here during the fall semester to either pursue their program in a hybrid format or completely remotely. So that's something we're very concerned about and has a lot of implications on planning. And then of course, moving forward, as well for the coming year. There's also a new proposed rule in place, which some of you may be aware of, and we can drop a link into the chat as an Inside Higher Ed article that I think lays this out very well. And it basically has to do with duration of stay for international students, which right now, as we know, is governed largely by institutions based on a student's progress toward the degree. And this new proposed rule basically puts that decision-making authority in the hands of the federal government, and it creates a standardized rule of 4 years. And so this has a lot of implications, certainly for undergraduate students, especially for graduate students, given that doctoral students very often take longer than 4 years to complete their program. And it has implications for students doing consecutive degrees, which a lot of our students do bachelor's and master's and diploma programs and doctoral degrees. So it's currently in a comment period, is my understanding, and I'm sure will be discussed, lobbied, fought perhaps aggressively. But we're monitoring it carefully, as I'm sure all of our colleagues are, and it certainly has implications moving forward. But again, it goes back to creating an incredible amount of uncertainty for international students, and something that we hope gets better over the coming months as we continue to recruit and work with students and provide them with guidance as to their options.
Thank you, Townsend. It really truly is a difficult time for those students, and for those of us on the planning side of the house, it's just challenging to keep up with the regulatory changes and ensuring that we're doing the right thing by our international students. I see that Robert Borden has returned from the land of dysfunctional internet. So I will again pose the question I posed to him a few moments ago. How do you plan enrollments, Robert, during the time of COVID, effectively threading the needle, given the unpredictable nature of the pandemic, implications on studios, ensemble, financial aid, etc.?
Thanks, Abra, and fingers crossed that I make it through this without getting cut off. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to those of us on the West Coast. As Abra mentioned earlier, for the past 5 years, really until about a week ago, I was the Chief Enrollment Officer at CalArts at the California Institute of the Arts. And like other schools where I've worked anyway, until the pandemic hit, we'd always been using a 3-year running average rate to predict everything from yield to retention to summer melt, you name it. Like many schools, we historically would watch these rates, we adjust them annually, and for every program using these enrollment patterns, we planned the enrollment, decided how many students we would admit, how many deposits we needed, how many would enroll, how continuing students would behave. But with the pandemic, we knew that nothing was going to be typical. When it became apparent pretty quickly, nothing was going to be average about this year. And so we really knew that how enrollment would behave would be quite unpredictable, in fact. So we stopped using these historical averages. I mean, we paid attention to them, but we also knew that they weren't going to be a lot of help to us. And we came up with some other ways. I'm not really sure how what we did is different from many of you on this call, but I can walk you through how CalArts did it. So we could see pretty quickly that there were many moving parts that might influence a student's decision to enroll or to stay enrolled. And these parts or factors really could go 2 or 3 or more different directions. So we kind of looked at them by new admits and returning students. And for new admits, we narrowed those factors down to a group of about 5. Well, here's the 5: residence hall availability, educational delivery mode, price or affordability, political policy issues that are happening either in the US or around the world, and then a student's personal choice was the 5th. So we asked a few key questions about each of these factors. For residence hall availability, would we keep the residence halls open or not? And what influence would that have on a new student's decision to enroll? Educational delivery mode, just trying to understand, and would we be teaching in person? Would we be hybrid, or would we be completely online? And what kind of impact would that have on the student? As for price, the big question a lot of schools face: would we adjust our tuition rate if we're not fully in person? Would we offer some kind of discount if we were entirely online? Political policy issues, touching a little bit on what Townsend just talked about. Would international students even be allowed in the country? And if they were allowed in the country, would they be able to obtain visas to get into the country? And then finally, personal choice, trying to kind of predict whether a new student would actually would they actually leave their home to attend college in the middle of a pandemic? And, was their likelihood to do that different if they were 18 years old going to college for the first time, or they were a transfer student, or they were a graduate student? So, just for the new admits, there was a lot to try to plan around. For returning students, all those factors were at play, of course, but we saw them as, in many ways, many of them were much less impactful and harder to even predict. And so what we did is we just decided to talk to the students. And we just asked them. We conducted a survey. We really had a variety of kinds of conversations, and asked students what they're planning to do, whether they're going to, if we were in person, if we were online, what was their plan? So we could try to get a sense of what their enrollment plan was. And then to further inform all of our planning, all of our kind of projectioning, I attended a handful of marketing and enrollment webinars that were put out by market researchers and other people in the enrollment world, and learned really from these. A pattern started to emerge, because many people were saying, either through the research they were doing or just their own opinion, or people from other universities were saying that they were expecting their enrollment to be down about 20%. So we used all of this information. We combined it all, and we built 4 likely enrollment scenarios. They ranged from what in hindsight was a ridiculously overly optimistic 3% reduction of enrollment, all the way down to a 33% enrollment loss. And then we had a couple of scenarios in between. And we monitored our current enrollment really closely from April to September, much more closely than we typically would, because usually the 3-year average helps things be very predictable. We just have to pay attention to where the problems are. But we watched it like a hawk all the way through, and we used the actual enrollment, or not really the actual enrollment, but looking at the number of students who had not chosen to defer, who had not chosen to take a leave of absence, or had not withdrawn. And we looked at those persisting students and tried to track that and help us identify where in these 4, we literally had a graph from I think it was from May through the end of September on each week, what enrollment in the 4 different scenarios might look like. And we tracked where we were to see where we were heading. As for the program specific and financial aid impact that was part of this question, we were monitoring everything really closely. Which majors were looking solid, which were seeing really more than their fair share of enrollment loss. And we used our wait lists in the admissions end and financial aid, both admissions and for returning students, within reason, of course, to manage this at kind of a program or a major specific level. And I have to say, this is really where the faculty involvement proved to be outstanding. because the program heads, individual faculty members, they were in really close touch with our students. And so we had a pretty good handle on where our challenges were, which programs, which majors were the most concerned. And we really tried then as we went through from April through, the end of September, we really tried to address those challenges in those places as we went along. Really based on this close monitoring and new predictive modeling, I guess if you want to call it that we were doing, we then just constantly were adjusting the number of admits we were making and the decisions whether to keep a program open or keep it closed or to close it, and whether when and whether to move to a wait list accordingly. So we were just kind of doing this all the way through, all the way really until a week or so after classes started. That's pretty much how we approached it, really from April through the end of September.
Thanks. I know it was very complicated for all of you this year. Without predictive models, it was just really, it made it all that more challenging. So I know that the amount of work never ceased over the summer, but it was truly heroic in some cases to try to figure out at all what was going to happen. My next question here actually has two parts, but I see that our colleague Lee from Colburn, hi Lee Chopa, has put sort of an adjacent comment or question into the Q&A. So I'm going to kind of add that question into this, Lee. So we'll get there in just a couple minutes. Just know it's coming. So the first part of this question really is about opportunity. The COVID epidemic has meant that many of us are doing things very differently than what we've done in the past. And in some cases, that's been really terrific. One of the things that I've enjoyed about speaking to faculty in the last few weeks has been that to a person, they all tell me that there are things about this remote teaching or this remote environment we're in that they're going to keep when this is over. So John Huling, I'm curious, what has been beneficial to your shop and what will you likely undoubtedly keep that your tools or skills or any ways you're connecting with students and families once we get out of the pandemic time?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, these opportunities to, have these students and more than we would normally get on campus. We might get 1 or 2 families at a time, but, to have a whole cluster of students who get to ask questions of us and hear each other's answers. It's like they might not have thought to ask a question, and yet by virtue of being in these collectives, they're benefiting from the questions that other people ask. And as I mentioned, our colleagues coming together around the country and creating these virtual college fair opportunities, those aren't going away. I think it's worth mentioning because it ties into what the faculty have gone through and what we've seen over the summer. In the spring when everybody was sent home, the world wasn't ready for this. And, our faculty were really tasked with not necessarily swimming, but trying not to sink to get through the spring semester. And of course, everybody heard the same issues with, how to do a voice lesson with Zoom, and you can't hear the high register and all this stuff. But I know that at Peabody, and probably in most cases, over the summer, the IT really stepped up. I mean, 24/7, they were figuring out, okay, if we come back virtually in the fall, how can we make this work? And I think it's a credit to probably most IT programs out there that what they presented in the fall has been more than satisfactory. And, we've gone around to department chairs and we've talked about morale and how it's going and the improvements that have been made in the last 6 months so that students can take lessons and they can do their classes is really phenomenal. And I think if it had been like it was last April, I think, enrollment would have dropped off more. Those that held good enrollment numbers, I think part of it is, people said, well, let me see how it goes. I'm gonna test it. And, I hope that everyone's having the success that we feel we're having. But again, I think we owe a lot of that to IT, that they stepped up to the plate and really, whether it's hardware or software, they really made it work for the faculty. And, so far so good.
Yeah, thanks, John. Conversely, I've also heard it said in administration circles or in leadership circles that one should never waste a good crisis. It is an opportunity for us to make changes at a much more rapid pace than we ever may have otherwise. Fred, I'm curious, what changes can you more easily create as a result of these tightened budgets and new ways of thinking and movement to remote modalities that you may not have been able to make otherwise?
Yes, well, thank you for the question. And again, it's great to be with you all this morning. The tightening in budgets, I would echo back Abra's word, opportunity. That's really what it has created. So really the opportunity to reallocate funds that are being reduced. So primarily our travel funds. No one is really getting on a plane this year. So we now have the opportunity to reallocate those, as well as print ads, and maybe switch over to more digital ads. So also the opportunity to create new videos and digital assets, be that our campus videos, building videos, creating departmental or curricular videos. We also have an opportunity, and I've been doing this at Roosevelt, in creating faculty introductory videos. So finding new ways to introduce faculty to students who might be searching after hours. We've actually been asking the faculty to just create a video in Zoom form, and then we send that over to our marketing department and they brand it. So we have that for them to be able to share via email, but it not just being textual, but an actual video that you're seeing a face and hearing someone speak. Also, the ability to produce online events, be that faculty, masterclasses and performances, online information sessions for recruitment purposes, and also other online outreach and enrichment events. One of the biggest things has been the access to other pedagogues and performers through guest lectures and masterclasses. The guests are no longer cost prohibitive with regard to travel and lodging, because we're now sitting in our own homes or sitting in our own offices. Just like today, I can be in Chicago and sharing with you all and collaborating with you in Baltimore, Laura coming from Michigan, Bob being out in California. So now there is an opportunity also to expand and diversify what the faculty and what the staff look like. We can now provide means of sharing and gathering ideas and intellect from all over, and allowing all of our students to share in that.
Thank you, Fred. That's very helpful. And it sort of really does articulate well with Lee's question. And I'll open this up for any of you on the panel to address. As you think about how to hold auditions this year, are you also discussing how the audition process for music is systematically problematic, with the substantial financial implications, ability to travel, and the short audition process that is a snapshot of a student's ability in unique circumstances, rather than an in-depth analysis of potential for growth and institutional fit? And if you are, how are you addressing that in your process?
Well, I could start with one example, and I'm sure there are many, many examples of how we're all thinking about this. But at Michigan, we definitely tried to dig into this over the course of the summer. We've worked with our departments to broaden opportunities for applicants to show what they view as their best work, rewriting the pre-screening and audition requirements to encourage, not just allow, but encourage a wider range of work, whether that be repertoire or other genres, and a wider time frame from which students can gather materials and submit them for review. So we've actually, for many departments, included a suggestion students could turn in YouTube links for work done, say, in the last 18 months, a broader time frame, so they can submit chamber ensembles they've been a part of, or past recitals they've been a part of, gigs, whatever it is. And we feel like that might give us a broader and perhaps more complete picture of what the students engaged in, rather than just the little specific items that we used to put on a pre-screening or an audition requirements list.
Thank you, Laura.
I'll also add to that, that one of the things we've done at Roosevelt, especially Lee, in terms of your question regarding growth and institutional fit, we have added a question within our application because Roosevelt University's mission is steeped in social justice. And so one of the questions that we've asked this year is, what does social justice mean to you, and how has it impacted you indirectly or directly? So we can learn more about the student as relates to our mission and the type of student that we believe would be a good fit for our program.
Great, thank you. I'll pivot to the next thing around support and retention of students. Again, this has been challenged by the pandemic. And so I'll turn to Bob and Townsend for this one. How has COVID impacted strategies for support and retention of students in either of your institutions? What have you seen in terms of trends and levels of support needed?
Sorry, I wasn't sure, Bob, you want to go? I can go for it, or you can. Maybe I'll just mention briefly that I think we would all agree that a lot of the trends that we've been seeing among student persistence and student success and mental health and whatnot have only been heightened by the current environment with COVID, particularly when you consider that students are feeling greater degrees of isolation, technology fatigue, and so greater bouts of issues related to mental health, right? So all of which speak to the need to be much more involved and proactive in ensuring that students are getting the tools that they need to be personally and professionally and academically successful. And so, a lot of the things that we're working on here are probably a lot of the same things that other schools are working on too, just a need to find creative ways to build community for students so that, they're not necessarily just in more Zoom sessions, right? But that you're working to replicate some of the more informal opportunities that students engage in when they're in person, right? In residence life, still maintaining the opportunity to have neighborhoods and virtual neighborhoods and roommates so that students can maintain those connections and build relationships. Much more proactive checking in on the part of student affairs staff and academic affairs staff, to see how students are doing. Making students aware of all the resources that are available to them, both in terms of academic and non-academic support, but in terms of mental health. And then last but not least, and this is probably in some ways the most important thing that we've noticed at least, and that is that being sure that you have a flexible financial aid process in order to accommodate and be responsive to students who are experiencing, in some cases, dramatic changes in family financial circumstances. And for some of us, that's more of a challenge than others, particularly if you're part of a school that has historically awarded aid primarily on the basis of merit and talent. And so we've had to do a lot of work here even before the pandemic to really make more flexible and responsive our financial aid process in order to accommodate those changes in circumstances, whether they be related to tuition or whether they be related to emergency needs that students may have as a result of food insecurity or technology needs and whatnot. So there's a lot of things, but for sure, the pandemic has brought about, a need to be much more attentive and much more proactive around these issues.
I think much of what Townsend said kind of overlaps with how CalArts approached and continues to approach student support in this regard. And I think that really we saw it more about student support than about retention. And if we made decisions that were about retention, they were much more about long-term retention than trying to specifically retain the student for this fall, trying to keep them from going on leave of absence. That was not part of any plan at all. So we kind of had three overriding things that we did. One was that we'll try to remain flexible, just like Peabody mentioned, that we tried to be, whatever there are decisions that are typically hard and fast, we tried to be more flexible this year. So whether they're just generalized deadlines or admitted students requesting to defer, or students choosing to take leave of absence, or even students wanting to go part-time. With all those decisions, we historically have been pretty strict, and some programs don't even allow certain of those things that I'm talking about. We were much more flexible this year with everybody to try to give students the ability to navigate this the way that worked best for them. We tried to over-communicate. Well, I wouldn't say we tried to over-communicate. We tried to clearly communicate. We probably ended up over-communicating. And that was just because our goal wasn't to influence the students to make a particular decision. Our goal was to make sure that students were making informed decisions. And the feeling, again, it was all about long-term retention of the student, helping them navigate through this so that we will see them one day when we are back open fully, if that day, when that day arrives. And then the other thing was the financial support. CalArts, like many schools, wrestled with the issue of whether or not tuition should be adjusted or whether there should be some kind of discount given to students, especially if it was going to be hybrid or completely online. And we made the decision that we weren't going to go down that road, but our board made a decision to release a significant amount of scholarship funding above and beyond our budget for this year to be used for scholarships for underrepresented minorities who also demonstrated financial need. And so that's another form of support. So these kind of three things they overrode everything all the decisions we were making, and people then implemented them themselves really from department to department. So that's how we approached it.
Thank you. There's a question that's sort of adjacent to this, if I may, in the Q&A, just to kind of continue this theme of funding and the support of students. Many of our organizations, of course, did some enhanced fundraising in the support of students early on in the pandemic. And, you know, we have, I think all of our organizations likely have been concerned and continue to be concerned around the level of fundraising that they're seeing due to unemployment rates and, you know, the uncertainty in the economy right now. I'm curious how funding or fundraising has impacted your ability, or has it not, to support students during this time? Were you able to see a bump in the funds that you had for student support, or did that not come true at your institutions?
I would just say that CalArts did exactly that. The development office worked really hard to raise additional funds back in, I think it was March or April. It was pretty early on, and it did allow us, I mean, of course, there's never enough, but it did allow us to have more. So, yeah.
Right.
I would just say at Peabody, you know, while there have been fundraising efforts that have been incredibly helpful, we made an institutional commitment to budget additional financial aid resources for students in anticipation of changes in family circumstances and whatnot. So it's been a two-pronged approach. One has been more aggressive fundraising, which has been helpful. The other has been an institutional commitment to increase funds for students in need.
Thank you, Townsend. Thank you.
Yes to all of that. And one additional initiative, we created a fund, SMTD Emergency Fund, and did some fundraising specifically to try and help students who would find themselves in dire straits.
Okay, if I may pivot again, many of our institutions, including the Peabody Institute, are deeply committed to the work of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I would love to hear from Laura and Fred in particular, in what ways have your institutions enhanced their approaches to building diversity and a stronger culture of inclusion and equity, especially since the summer and the heightened sort of awareness around these issues?
Certainly. So our approach has really started with getting a better sense of awareness regarding the learned behavior of our students. The past is often informing the present. And for 13 years, our students have been engaged in an educational environment where they're taught to be aware of various social norms, especially inclusive language in terms of pronouns, non-binary genders. And they've also been engaging with people that have had underlying health issues, special needs, and mental health challenges. For them, that's normal. And the challenge is that when they arrive at college, sometimes we at the collegiate level still find that several of these items are either something new or even a mystery. At my institution, students today are acting out and they're making demands, not requests. And so in considering where to start, we are working to become more aware of our language, but more importantly, more aware of students' backgrounds, especially their educational environments. Students have an expectation of what the institution will look like, and sometimes that's based on even its location. but too often that's not the case. So we're really starting our approach with awareness. Laura?
I'm going to jump in on that point specifically. Some of the things that we're doing, we have a strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And because this is a session about admissions in particular, just two thoughts, and then we'll continue on. Defining what you're talking about and setting very specific goals that are responsive to your school's current profile, we have found to be particularly helpful. Just saying we'd like more underrepresented students at our school doesn't really help you get the job done as much as saying we need more low breast women. We need ethnic diversity in our school that is not centered in just a few departments, and working to figure out how the diversity percentages at our school compare to local population. Really digging into goals about first generation and low income students, and as we were just speaking about, will our financial aid budgets really support meeting that need? The other thought is, what can the school do to meet students where they are? So in admissions in particular, looking at financial access to applications. Can we make the fee waiver process easier, simpler, not so complicated? Can we reduce video preparation costs, that hiring of the accompanist et al.? Reduce or eliminate travel costs, and with COVID, clearly most all the travel costs are already eliminated. I don't know that folks are going to respond well if we go back to, yes, you need to spend $1,000 to come to an audition in person next year. As has been mentioned, we have tried to adapt audition requirements and essay questions, as Fred's saying, to use inclusive language, one selection versus one art song. Explicitly encouraging female and underrepresented composers. As Fred said, students are demanding, however, that this be connected to the curriculum. Ask me to sing or ask me to do, and then I want to see that in the repertoire when I get there. Exactly what Fred was saying. And then offering those broad opportunities for students to show their best work.
Great, thank you.
Abra, just to add on, we are also looking to implement solutions that address the individual needs of our students. Of course, we're all first looking at diversifying our faculty, but not as a means of diversity for the sake of diversity. Instead, we're really talking about it as a means of creating and developing role models. Because when students come to our institutions, we often say they're coming because of the faculty. These are the people that they're going to be studying with for multiple semesters. We say that the faculty are inspiring the performance and development of our students. But today, many students are looking for role models that look like them or can relate to their background or their upbringing. And more specifically, many students are looking for role models because they're pursuing something that is not typical. For example, a female tuba player or female jazz player, a male harpist, I would say an African-American classical musician, or a first generation or low socioeconomic bassoonist. As we search to expand the types of role models we have, we're encouraging our faculty to also tell their story of their path, because some of the times those things that they've overcome are just not known. It's not what's written in their bio. The students believe that it's an easy path. I just go here for undergrad, here for graduate school, and here for my doctorate, and then the job will magically appear. But they don't understand necessarily how challenging the path really is. I've had a former faculty colleague who has shared with their students that they were a recovering alcoholic, or another one that said, I had severe performance anxiety. I never wanted to perform. And the interesting thing is that often that was met with more relief than fear. And so instead of assuming that everything is easy and basically allowing students to learn these truths after the process has completed, really, if we can find ways to put that more inside the process and develop not only role models, but mentors with shared experience.
I think you're absolutely right, Fred. One of the most powerful moments for me in the last few years here at Peabody, we've, just as a point of fact, we've increased the diversity of the faculty from about 5% underrepresented minority faculty to about 16% underrepresented minority faculty in the last 4 or 5 years. And in doing so, there was a young man, a graduate student, who approached me one day to say, I've never had a Black male teacher in my entire school experience, and now I have several. And that was so impactful for that student, and such an incredible moment for him to see himself in the person in front of him. And so every time we have a situation in which we're doing hiring, I think back to that person, because I think how meaningful it is for so many students to see themselves in front of them, to have those role models that you talked about. So I appreciate that very much, Fred. Again, I want to switch. I want to pivot just for a second and talk a little bit about financial aid. It's always a huge concern for our incoming students, especially those that are in the private sector, I have to say, or those that are out of state, as they may be in Laura's case. So Laura, I'm curious, how are you defining the parameters on which you're awarding aid, and what advice might you have for those who are seeking aid in this current environment?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I clearly do not have all the answers. Every situation, as I said before, I think is local. But I know that we have all acknowledged the economic challenge for college-going students. Tuition is wildly expensive, even at public schools like mine. And everything else that goes along with college going is as well. Food insecurity is a reality for many students. We have a Maize and Blue cupboard on campus to help students who are in that situation. There are very few families who can manage the cost without help. And yet the music scholarship budgets are never enough to do everything we'd like to do. And with the impact of COVID on many of our individual budgets, we're going to find constraints perhaps even more difficult. So one way to do it, and not a fix-all or anything, but one way to do it, we have simply said that we need to maximize every dollar a student is eligible for. And if that means that a student has a financial aid need, we want to capitalize on all of that, as well as put together a merit scholarship package that helps the student be able to afford to attend. So we have specific scholarships, our music-based scholarships are merit-based but need-informed. We developed a partnership with the Central Office of Financial Aid for undergraduates to try and maximize every dollar a student's eligible for. So for example, you set some goals that say we want to maximize, we secure the desired quality and quantity of students in each instrument, discipline area, and we want to use every external dollar possible. So the decision steps then, in terms of what are the parameters to make that choice, faculty provide the essential artistic evaluation, report on their engagement with the student. Academics for us are a supporting criteria, but the priorities are established by the faculty in terms of their individual students for their studio or their department. And then the assessment of need-based eligibility through the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and an estimate of need-based gift aid, that which does not have to be paid back or worked for other than go to class, which faculty may know if they're interested in. And then merit scholarship awards are then determined with those initial goals foremost in mind. How do we secure the quality and quantity for the fill in the blank? The kazoo studio, we don't have a kazoo studio, I'm just doing it not to offend anybody. How do you get the best quality of applicant? And it might mean in some cases that the number one has full need support, and so the scholarship support we give is to replace a loan, but that's all. And the number two, who's equally as good, but differentiated by a small margin, maybe gets a larger merit award than the first student because they don't have nearly as much need. And that's been a real culture shift within the faculty. What do you mean the number one doesn't get the maximum award we have to give? Well, no, because they're going to get gift dollars from another source. And in the end, the student doesn't care much about which pocketbook it comes from. So that's been one way that we've tackled stretching dollars to help as many students as possible.
Do any of the rest of you have greatly divergent processes from that? That sounds pretty familiar, Laura, to everything I've encountered in my work in this sector. Okay, I think that's probably most of you. There's an interesting question that came into the Q&A. Thank you to Janet Underhill for this. I'm wondering if any of you have thought about the road ahead and how not many students are able to start on an instrument this year, thanks to them being beginners when the pandemic hit. She said, I'm seeing a big hole coming down the road. Have any of you or in your professional organizations given any thought to what happens, you know, when those 5th or 6th graders become seniors? Townsend,
I will say it is, we are in a fascinating environment right now because we see both short-term and long-term effects that are impacting music education and performing arts education around the country. I've recently spoken with a high school band director in Colorado, and he said that his band was down 15% this year. So there's a concern in terms of what is the pool this year, but then absolutely when you go backwards and look at the beginnings of education in the arts, not only a question of who can start, but also will their schools still support music education if they're losing funding? So there's a variety of things that we're looking at, but I think also that's why we have an opportunity from the collegiate standpoint to be resources for those teachers, for those community, because we have the means online of sharing that information and being able to do it as a resource for communities.
thank you. I want to do one last question, and I'll quickly just run through each of you if that's okay. I would love it if you would say just a word or two. What advice might you have for students auditioning for art schools in this particular season? What are your greatest recommendations for them, and what little tidbit would you like to leave with them if you could today? I will call on you just to make sure we don't all speak over each other, if that's okay. And I'll start with Robert Borden, please.
I would just say I would encourage students, and I do encourage students to pay close attention to what each school is looking for, not just build an audition set that they play for everybody. Make sure they're doing that. And if they have concerns about anything, about having recording or doing something not coming in person, discuss those with the schools, but not to sweat the small stuff.
Thank you. Laura Hoffman, please.
My advice to a student would be put in the work, get a little bit better every single day, try and find new and unique ways to stay motivated, which we all know is challenging at this time, but do the work and then be your true self at the audition and know that it will be enough.
Thank you. John Huling. Oh, John, I'm sorry, you win the muted award.
Sorry. Continue to play for people. For these auditions this year, unfortunately, you're going to be playing into a video camera, but, the love of performing is getting a reaction, is getting something back, whether it's an audition committee or whether it's an audience. So you play for your family, play for your friends. Remember why you're doing it. You're doing it because you love it. You have something to say. It's why you practice, so that you get up there and strut your stuff and be an artist. So yeah, this year, going to do it into a video camera, but, maybe while you're recording it, have your family sitting there behind the camera, just inspiring you. Just, make it as personal as you can.
That's a great tip, John. Just remember why we're doing this, right? Fred, please.
Yes, I'm going to give two quick things. Number one, reach out, faculty are now in the same boat and are involved in technology. So you can ask them for sample lessons if they're interested in that. You can even ask if you can sit in on their Zoom masterclasses or studio classes. So there's a lot of resources available to you. I'll just follow up on John's and say, if you're not comfortable having your family around, what you can also do is you can create the environment of being nervous. Run in place really fast, get your heart rate up, and then play your pieces. It's all about just creating that environment of nervousness. So your heart rate goes up, hands get sweaty, and there's no more breath that you have. And then perform, because if you can prove to yourself you can do it under that condition, if it happens again, you know that you'll still be successful.
Thank you, Fred. And Townsend, last word from you.
Okay. Always remember, it's much better to play a slightly easier piece really, really well than a more difficult piece poorly. So choose audition repertoire very carefully, play your best, have something to say, be in touch with schools to try to identify the best fit, and there'll be a place for you.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and in fact, we're a little bit over. My apologies for that, but I thought all of that wisdom from this panel was really important. To Robert and Laura and John and Fred and Townsend, thank you so much for this presentation today. It was so informative, and hopefully was informative to others who were attending.